Right now on KCCI, the leader of the Iowa Democratic Party, we talk with the state representative and party chair, Ross Wilburn, his reaction to what's moving through the state house and what is next for the Democratic Party. And this weekend, we wrap up our celebration of Black History Month. Coming up, meet two Iowans who have had a big impact on our community and the world. Close Up starts right now.
This is Iowa's news leader. This is KCCI 8 News Close Up.
Good morning and thank you for joining us. I'm Scott Carpenter. Well, this past week at the Iowa State House, Republican lawmakers pushed through a controversial bill that would have a big impact on voters. Here's what this legislation does. It would shorten Iowa's early voting period from 29 to 20 days. Polls would close earlier on Election Day by an hour. The bill also prevents county auditors from sending out absentee ballot request forms unless a voter requests one. The measure is now on its way to Governor Reynolds' desk. Reynolds has not committed to signing it. Last week, we devoted our entire show to Governor Reynolds. This morning, we're going to hear from the Iowa Democrats. KCCI Chief Political Reporter Cynthia Fodor spoke with the new chair of the Iowa Democratic Party, State Representative Ross Wilburn.
Thanks for joining us today. There's a lot going on up at the State House. This week, we saw the early voting bill with almost 5 hours of debate there. What's your reaction to this legislation that many people are calling a voter suppression bill?
It's more than disappointing. All the bill really is going to do is make it harder for Iowans to vote. We had record turnout this past election, and that shows that the process that we currently have that's evolved over time, that Iowans trust the system, Iowans trust each other in terms of conducting elections, and that our election officials are able to resolve any difficulties that come out. But Iowa voters, they like the convenience. They also like the possibility or opportunity to get their vote taken care of, because you never know what's going to happen in terms of family issues or job or being stuck out of town. All of those things can happen, especially when we've got people that are taking care of older Iowans, their parents, and making sure that they are able to exercise their freedom to vote. But again, it's just, like I said, after a record turnout and a safe and secure election, we should be working together to build on that success. We Democrats wanted to do things like have automatic voter registration, the option to early vote, so that you don't always have to put in the absentee ballot request for every election, if that's the way that you want to do it. Just like you would do with, some transaction with your bank, that it becomes automatic and there's security worked in with our banks. It works for a business practice. Why can't we do that for government?
And another one of the big issues at the State House, the amendment to the Iowa Constitution that does not guarantee a right to an abortion in the state. It failed last session. Do you think it will pass this time?
I'm not sure if the Republicans have the votes or not, but taking away the rights of women is not who we are as a state. In Iowa, we trust women to make their own health care decisions in consultation with their medical provider. And the bottom line with that, the amendment for constitutional amendment about abortion, as well as about gun rights, these are very extreme political divisive positions, and the Republican Party and under Governor Reynolds' leadership have failed to address the issues that are right in front of us, planning for an effective vaccination rollout, providing and extending support to renters as well as landlords in terms of making sure that no one gets evicted from their home, support for smaller business, those less than 20 employees, because of the not only the pandemic, but going back with the derecho that came up. Those are things that we could have been talking about, as well as getting kids back to school safely. Instead, we spent our time with divisive amendments.
And I think Iowans are tired of divisive politics. Is there any bipartisan legislation out there that Democrats and Republicans are working on together?
There were some child care bills that came through. Fortunately, they came through. They don't go far enough, but at least it's something. So the child care is at least where there's some agreement within the party. But frankly, there are several bills that are coming through in addition to being harmful, hurtful, but there are others that they don't really do anything. They quote existing statutes, or it's some different twist on something that's enforceable under the Iowa Code. So again, rather than spending time on things that aren't covered, that aren't meeting Iowans' basic needs to live, to take care of their families, for their job, for transportation, broadband, we haven't been talking about those. We let off with divisive issues.
Last year, there was the bipartisan criminal justice reform where both parties came together in like a day and acted on that. But this year, we've had the governor's back the blue bill, but it seems like that's been broken into pieces, and the ban on racial profiling hasn't seemed to advance. Is there a chance some steps still could be taken on criminal justice reform this session?
The driver's seat really is in the focus or not of the Republican Party to address issues that are right in front of us. There was an opportunity to build upon consensus that Iowans said that we want safe community policing. We want it done in a safe, responsible way, which the vast majority of law enforcement does. But there's some things that have been happening across the country and some tension points here in the state where we said, we want to make sure it's safe, that there's respectful interactions going on, and that there's effective community policing. But once again, the governor's trying to play politics. She hasn't stopped campaigning since she's been in office and trying to just address a certain part of her base and constituency, as opposed to looking at governing and meeting the needs and concerns of all of Iowa.
Speaking of the governor and turning to education, she just did sign the 2.4% SSA increase. Are you happy with that? I mean, do you think $179 per student is enough?
It's not about whether I'm happy. It's whether Iowans are happy and can live with the fact that education is being underfunded, that funding for our students is not adequate. Teachers shouldn't have to pull money out of their pocket to help pay for certain supplies. Public dollars should be spent for public education. They're talking about an educational saving account, which amounts to a voucher which takes money away from the public school system, where the public schools have to serve all students, especially students that require a little bit more extra educational support, which in some cases costs money.
Up next, the future of the Iowa caucuses, plus what Black History Month means for Representative Wilburn. Our conversation continues next.
They say that imitation is the sincerest.
Welcome back to KCCI 8 News Close Up. KCCI's Cynthia Fodor wraps up her conversation with Iowa Democratic Party Chair Ross Wilburn.
I'm going to ask you to put on your other hat now as the new chair of the Iowa Democratic Party. What do you see as your top priorities there?
I'm honored to have been selected to serve as the chair of the Democratic Party. We are a party who cares about people and opportunity. And, right in front of us right now, because of the results of the last election, I have to and we have to work on growing the party, building the party. I have to fundraise so that I can put staff in place to organize year round, as opposed to something that is, the presidential campaigns come and there's a coordinated campaign effort. There's more staff brought to the state. So we're shorter on resources that way. So this on again, off again, organizing, talking with Iowans about issues that are happening in their communities across the state. We've got to be more consistent about that, as well as connecting the issues that are happening right now in Des Moines and in the legislature with the people that they chose to put into office. That is, Republicans that are putting forth a bill to make it hard to vote. There's Republicans and their leadership who decided, to underfund education. It's Republican legislators and the governor that, are well, I'm going to stick with the governor, who's put in some practices, again, campaigning, not governing, and giving out no bid contracts to a company that, makes campaign yard signs, that doesn't have a history with safe medical equipment, to her hired donors, to making sure that they have testing for coronavirus in their parking lot where there's been testing issues across the state. Those are really corrupt practices and behind the scene deals that's not looking out for the broader interest of Iowa. Those are the things that I want Democrats talking about, that I want independents and moderate Republicans talking about. Is this how we want to be governed? Do we want to have safe business practices in place and access to broadband, or do we want to focus on divisive issues? These are the types of things I want Iowans discussing.
And there's a lot of talk about getting rid of the Iowa caucuses. Even former Senator Harry Reid wrote an op-ed piece saying that Nevada should go first now. What conversations are being held on the national level? And do you think, I'm guessing you do, that Iowa should stay first in the nation?
We've followed this process for years, and every 4 years threats are made about the calendar when the Democrats look at the calendar. And what I can tell you is that we're committed to doing whatever it takes to keep Iowa first in the nation. I'm confident that we can make our case, highlight changes that we need to improve, and every 4 years we make improvements about our process and keep Iowa first. But we can do better, and we have to do better. And we're willing to make those systemic changes to keep it accessible, inclusive, accurate, as well as transparent.
And what would you say are the lessons that the Democrats learned from the 2020 caucuses?
Well, before I became chair, the party took the important step of conducting a thorough review, transparent, independent review, what went wrong caucus night, as well as some things that went right. Some of the experiences that I've heard, it was about more about the reporting, and in the end, they got it right, and that's part of cleaning up any process. But Iowa has a critical role to play in the presidential preference process, and we're prepared to defend first in the nation, and that starts by what I've already done. I've been the chair less than a month, and I've reached out, had a great conversation with DNC Chair Jamie Harrison. He's really getting started as DNC chair, but he's a former chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party. I've been in touch with the New Hampshire Democratic Party chair, as well as the Association of Democratic Committees, state committees, the chairperson of all the chairs of the Democratic Party, and had a conversation about how we can make sure that our democratic presidential process is that inclusive piece. And I'm willing to work however we need to work to make sure that process goes forward.
And finally, we're wrapping up Black History Month. And how did you celebrate, and why is this important and meaningful to you?
This entire month, I've been honored to have been invited to speak to different groups. I know the Democratic Party's hosting an online event Friday night, and I'll be glad to participate in that, just to share stories. I participated in a couple Zoom meetings. Unfortunately, one of them was Zoom bombed by some folks that are full of hate and groups who are hateful. But that's always been out there, and it's important to focus on the people who recognize that a diverse, inclusive, and welcoming Iowa is our future, and I try and focus on those positives. So speaking engagements, there've been opportunities for really just sharing my personal story, serving as the first African American chair of the Iowa Democratic Party, I believe either of the major political parties in Iowa. But it's not my first. I was the first Black mayor of the city of Iowa City, and I believe I'm also the first Black representative from the city of Ames, from Story County. So as Vice President Kamala Harris says, the first, but make sure you're not the last.
Next on Close Up, 2 Iowans who are making a difference. We wrap up our celebration of Black History Month.
At K-12, we're ready.
He's an internationally acclaimed opera singer who launched his career during the civil rights movement. Simon Estes found he was more welcomed abroad than he was in his home country. Dr. Estes is from Centerville. He has performed around the world on every continent except Antarctica. He spoke with KCCI's Kayla James about living through history and making it count for the future.
My name is Simon Estes. I'm an opera singer and a professor. I was born in Centerville, Iowa back in 1938.
This is the voice of an internationally acclaimed bass baritone opera singer, Dr. Simon Estes, a University of Iowa and Juilliard School of Music graduate, an opera singer who performed in front of global leaders, taught as a professor at universities across the world, but for years found it hard to perform in the U.S. due to the color of his skin.
in the mid-'70s, I'd sung in a lot of opera houses, like in Rome and London and Vienna, Geneva, Switzerland, Spain. They still wouldn't let me sing in some of the opera houses in this country. And I remember I called my mother, because I was living in New York then, and I called my mother. She was out here, and I was, Mother, and I will admit tears. I was crying. I said, they won't let me sing at the Met, and they won't let me sing in a lot of the opera houses. And I've sung all of these houses. And my mother said, well, son, now you just get down on your knees and you pray.
You spent a while in Europe.
Well, I've lived in Europe more than I have in the United States, because I started singing in 65.
Was there a notable difference in how you were treated as a black singer from Europe to America?
Yes. That's what made me very sad. I'm not saying there was no discrimination in Europe, there was. But the people there judged me, like Martin Luther King said, on my character and on my talent and on my skin color. We were singing out in San Francisco, but they were probably being paid $15,000, maybe $20,000 a performance for singing the lead roles as tenors. They paid me $257 a performance.
The civil rights movement.
Right.
Did that have any impact on your career?
I remember when Martin Luther King gave his great speech. I heard him speak. Actually, I heard him speak in person when I was a student at the University of Iowa. And Martin was somebody who really inspired me, and to treat hatred with love.
You were a young adult during the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
And now, a little more than 5 decades later, we're seeing a movement that occurred last year after the killing of George Floyd.
And to see all what has happened this year, last year, the year 2020, was a tough year. I just said to my wife, I said, I'm tired. I'm just tired. And they say, oh, we don't have any discrimination in America. It does still exist.
What has to change?
The only way I think that we're going to reduce discrimination in the United States is parents need to start teaching their children at a very young age.
A lot of people have called what occurred after the killing of George Floyd the young people's movement, or this generation's movement. For the young people who are out there leading, what do you want them to know?
You can only drive out hate with love. So my suggestion is, let's give love a chance.
In Des Moines, I'm Kayla James.
Up next, the Des Moines pioneer who made history at Drake University. We share the story of Elaine Estes next. Well, Elaine Estes is a wealth of knowledge. She came to Iowa at 16 to attend Drake University, and she made history as the first black woman to reside in Drake dorms and as an executive director for Des Moines Public Library. KCCI's Rhea Spigner shares her story.
Walk me through, I think I want to start with your journey coming from Missouri to Drake University.
They indicated they had not had African Americans in the dormitory. My parents said I could not come to school here at 16 years old because I had to be in the dormitory.
Talk to me about what it felt like being in Des Moines. Did things seem neutral? Did they seem progressive for people who look like us? We
were later surprised that some things were not as open as we had expected. But again, that was not because of Iowa laws. There turned out to be a case later in the 1950s that sued Katz Drug Store for not permitting people to eat at their soda fountain.
Not permitting black people, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you feel like is the difference between that moment of civil rights and what people were fighting for when you were in the thick of it versus George Floyd and what ignited those protests here?
The early civil rights, I think, were very structured and very goal-oriented and very carefully thought through and formalized with the people working across the country. We were sort of in the 2020 year, which had many things going on for it politically and socially and at random. And so I think that's the one difference in there not being a structure or particular things to achieve.
What needs to change now in Iowa and across the country?
I'm not sure how you train people's mind or their taste or their exposure to understanding that everybody needs to be accepted on their own cognizance. George Floyd and the other people who've been killed, there's kind of assumption that they're all the same, and that certainly is not true. And people should be listened to and given an opportunity to present their case before they're shot down.
The leaders who are going to take over this world, what's one thing you would say to them?
Be informed before you make a decision. Being informed means being educated, however you get it, formally or informally. You know what you're about.
Thank you for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. We'll see you back here next Sunday.